Hello, and thank you all for joining me today for this Bright Talk webinar. I'm excited to have our group here together talking about something that's been in the news and we talk about all the time, which is the changes that are happening today to performance management and performance management systems. We'll go through the slides, obviously. I do want to let you know that I will be watching the questions box. If anybody wants to type in a question as we go, feel free. I would love to answer those questions. So let's jump right in and talk about today's topic. First of all, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. Not all of you know me. My name is Lori Kleiman. I started my career in human resources in our family business. And I stayed there about 12 years, worked my way up to a vice president of operations role, and ended up leaving in 1998 to start my own HR consulting company. And at that time, it was a small cottage business. I worked out of my home. But by the time I grew that, I ended up with 6 employees working full-time in the basement of my house. And I knew that it was time for me to do something. And along came a company, Arthur J. Gallagher. Many of you on the call may know Gallagher Benefit Services. They also have a division, Gallagher Bassett. And Gallagher bought my consulting company, and I stayed on and worked for them for another 7 years. And just left 2 years ago to start my own company again. I'm very entrepreneurial in nature, called HR Topics. And now what I do is this kind of speaking, training. I work a lot at conferences, trade shows, association meetings, and inside corporations, bringing this information to various teams of all sorts of HR issues. The reason I share this with you is because I like people to understand that I both have a background in business and human resources. I do have a master's degree in HR, and I'm certified at the human resource level at the highest we can be certified for our profession, the SPHR and the SHRM SCP. The reason that's important is that I look at human resources through the lens of your business, and I think it is so critical that we make sure that anything we do in HR, we are aligning with the business needs of your organization. And that is where this program was born out of. Now let's talk about our next 40 minutes together. You have expectations of me, and I have a few expectations of you. So understand that my style is very fast-paced. I'm going to give you lots of ideas, lots of different things that you can take away from this. And I'd like you to participate to the extent possible. I know on a webinar that's a little bit difficult. I also know we're going to have a lot of people listening to this as a recorded program. So where you can, though, if you've got a question, go ahead and type it in. I do have a couple of polls that we can participate in and at least get to know a little bit about what other people on the webinar are doing. And finally, my hope is that you will take away a few action items from this. I can't promise every single slide is going to be relevant for your organization, but I feel like if you can walk away with 2 or 3 action items, then our time spent together today is going to be productive. We'll probably go about 40, 45 minutes because without the audience interaction, it tends to go a bit more quickly. So if you're just planning your time, I'd love to have you stay till the end. Those of you who are looking for certification for the SHRM or HRCI programs, stay active, participate in our 2 polls, and we'll be able to tell at the end that you were engaged in the webinar. So just email me at the end if you need one of those 2 certificates. So let's jump into the program. Overall performance management. It's important today that we're talking about why we're even doing performance management. There has been a lot of information about the annual review being outdated, boring, useless, everything else. And so what we're going to talk about is why it's so important to align the program with your strategic plan, designing those feedback sessions, how to set goals for top talent, that sort of thing. So these are the things that we look for as we are going to talk about the next 45 minutes or so together. It's important that we understand what are we talking about here. And we're talking about a performance appraisal as a way to really review and assess the not only performance, but the capability and needs of your various employees. It's important that you make sure that your management team is aligned with what you're even trying to accomplish. We want everybody to understand why performance management matters. And the reason that we have these assessments and appraisals is, first of all, to make sure everybody's on the same page. We've all had the situation where the guy in blue is flipping upside down and the manager wants everybody right side up like the person in yellow. There are compliance components to this. And any of you who've been involved with an unemployment hearing or other litigation will know the first thing the courts ask for is recent performance reviews. A good performance review will also keep your employees engaged. They want to be able to plan for the future and know what you have in store for them. It really is something employees want to do. While they might act like they really are resisting that annual meeting, they want good quality information that comes out of it. So let's talk about what is important as you design your performance management program and the conversations. The first that I always like to tell people to start with is know the strategic plan. Because only by aligning the performance management system with the strategic plan are we really able to make sure that we have a program that helps drive results that the organization wants. Otherwise, we're just going willy-nilly and telling people, oh, your attendance was good, oh, your quality was good. Hopefully, they already know that. You want to make sure that your performance management program is truly aligned with the strategic plan of your organization. If you are not aware of what those things are, it's time to sit down with your management team, look at your current performance review form, and pull it apart. Start saying to people, hey, what we're interested in is being an industry leader in our niche. So are we evaluating people on new ideas they're bringing to the table? Are we evaluating people on participating in industry conferences? Are we evaluating people on the things that will align our individual employees with our strategic plan? As you think about systemic alignment, consider adding value to the conversation so that you continue to bleed your strategic initiatives, goals, and visions throughout your employee conversations. So when you sit down and look at your performance management document, really discuss with your leadership team, if you are not part of that leadership conversation today, discuss with them what went into the strategic plan. What are those initiatives that they see as so important that you should be evaluating your employees on that information? So these are ways, one of the things that I do, and I've got some other things out on Bright Talk that you're welcome to listen to, about really driving your own careers forward. This is a great way, if you are not part of your senior leadership team today, this is a great way to engage and show senior leaders that you are looking at the strategy of the organization. Make sure that your performance management system focuses on both medium and long-range initiatives. So we don't just want to be evaluating employees on what they are doing to meet our goals today. We want to make sure that we are giving them the opportunity to prepare for the future as well. Consider items that are not in the strategic plan, but that you need to be looking at. For example, is your operations manager out there working on training and development initiatives for equipment that he knows he's ordering in the next 24 months? And then finally, make sure that you've got a timeline for this program and metrics for success. What does a successful performance management program look like in your organization? As you set these goals for the program, know what the key drivers of your corporate success are. Define the acceptable return on investment for this program. So for instance, if you're going to redesign your performance review program, and that's going to cost you a certain amount of money and time and energy, what productivity initiatives would you expect to see? Or maybe lowered turnover rates or increase in promotions, that sort of thing. And honestly, as you look at your performance review program, honestly reflect on what the future looks like in your organization. I see people create these beautiful systems that give people all sorts of opportunities for the future, when the truth is their organization may not be creating those positions as fast as they're promising them to others. And finally, as you talk about the performance review system, make sure that you are focusing on what matters to your C-suite. Because all too often, we are out there creating programs that management just sees as a nuisance and something else to get in their way. So one thing I would like to ask everybody is, and I think if I just start voting, you can, how many employees in your organization? Go ahead, if you would, me quickly and just answer this poll. And people, it looks like are voting now, I think. I don't see. Can you guys, somebody type if you see the poll or not, questions? It says it's open, but I don't see. Can anyone vote on the poll? Can somebody just type in the question in the questions box if you see it? Oh, now I've got votes. Okay, so there we go. Fabulous. Okay, perfect. I'm going to give it just 30 more seconds. We're almost done. We've got votes coming in now, and I do appreciate that. It helps me to define the program and to refine it, I should say, knowing who we have here on the call. And as long as people are still voting, I'm going to keep that open for another minute or two. But we do have a large number of the people on the call from very large audiences. Thank you for whoever said that they saw it. That's terrific. And so for many of you, you may or may not be the actual one involved in setting the strategy for the performance management program. Oh, the votes are coming in like crazy. So I'm going to keep talking and come back to this in a minute. Let's talk about, go ahead and keep voting if you want. I'm going to stop it in a minute. But everybody needs to understand that performance management is often a very important piece of our compliance situation in human resources. We need the performance reviews to be able to show that we've treated everyone equally. We often use them when we have workers' comp injuries. And we want to be able to use the performance review system as a way to talk to employees about their impact on others as well as connections with our customers. So let's stop the voting now. And I'm not sure if you guys can see the slides or not, but we have 40% of the people on the call have over 500 employees. And another 18% have 150 to 500, and 22% of you are 50 to 150. So I hope that those of you, 58% with over 150 employees, have or are the full-time human resource manager in your, oh good, you can see the results. Thanks, perfect, then I will stop talking about them. But we also have the very small group, people who represent very small organizations. So that's really terrific that we have everybody on the call. So excellent. Okay, moving ahead with, and thank you all for letting me know. So anytime we talk about performance management, we always want to talk about starting with the job description. Because only by starting with the job description are you sure that you and your employee are on the same page of what kind of performance is expected. And if you don't have job descriptions in your organization today, it may be something that you want to think about adapting, because they really do meet a lot of needs we have in human resources. So those of you in the larger organizations, hopefully you all have job descriptions, make sure that you are using your performance review time to review those job descriptions with your employees. Because so often we find that the job changes throughout the year. And it's a great time to sit down and review the job description, make sure the employee is still doing what you think the employee is supposed to be doing, and that you're all on the same page. It's important too, as we talk about performance management, that we really do consider what I refer to as the new face of work. And it's really just looking at the soft skills of the people that are working for us, and that we are deciding whether or not these are the things that we want to be reviewing on. So, for instance, does your performance management system look at whether or not people are adaptable? Does it look at whether or not people are creative or innovative or customer focused? These are all really important things in most of our businesses today. And I would suggest to you that having conversations around these issues are even more important than whether or not someone is showing up on time, whether or not somebody is, has the sort of nuts and bolts of a job. Because I think that we can all agree that those things better be handled long before you ever get to the performance management conversation. Those things should be handled in the moment. Somebody said I'm cutting in and out, so I'm going to switch hopefully that will be better. I'm switching to that. Okay. So thank you for telling me that. That's helpful. What a performance review is not is, this is on YouTube. I'm not going to play it now because I'm always afraid when I jump to the internet that it gets warbly. But if you just go to YouTube and search Scrubs, that's the TV show, SCRUBS, Performance Review. This is a hysterical little scene about a manager who really doesn't want to do a performance review and has the employee do it for themselves. Some of you on the call may be responsible for training your managers on how to do performance reviews well. When I do that kind of training inside of corporations, I always use this Scrubs video, and I encourage you to do the same. You'll see here's the URL, and I will send everybody the slides after the presentation, and it'll have the URL on there. So if you want to look, but the easiest way is just go out to YouTube and search Scrubs Performance Management. So thank you for whoever said they could hear me. I appreciate that too. You're right. Sometimes it's just each person's system is a little bit different. So what should performance reviews be? Let's talk about the positive pieces of a performance review. For our employees, we should see a performance review as a resource. They should be a time where they can participate with the manager and provide an honest evaluation of how they're doing today. We do need to ask our employees to be open and receptive to the feedback. And typically when I do in-house training, obviously I do a long training with managers, but then I also do a training with the employees themselves. And I help talk to employees about how to be open and participative during the performance management conversation. You want to make sure that employees know that their performance has to be aligned with those organizational goals that we talked about at the beginning of the program. From the manager's perspective, we want to make sure that that performance review conversation is reflective of the entire body of work, and that they too are open to dialogue and providing constructive feedback to their employees. One of the things I like to remind people is that make sure that your managers, when they are promising employees development opportunities, that there is truly a budget in your system for them to offer those things to employees. Because I just love, as an HR professional, when a manager puts down in a performance review, we'd like to support you in getting your MBA, for example, and you know darn well your CEO is never going to pay for that. So really think about it and make sure that your managers understand that ongoing feedback is far more important than sitting down for the annual performance review. You want them to know that they should be talking to people immediately about both positive feedback and constructive criticism, but that you want the positive feedback to happen in a very public, open way. The private feedback should be happening for the constructive criticism. So you want to make sure managers understand positive things happen out in the open where people can get a lot of accolades. The constructive criticism, though, really does need to happen in private. And that you and your own organization have good systems and processes about when things get documented and when things do not. Another piece of the management training is to really understand for yourself and your managers what is the goal of the annual performance review process. So for many of us, it's to determine salaries for the new year. It often is about setting goals, giving feedback, and just spending time with employees. You wouldn't believe how valuable and important that is to your employee population just to have some one-on-one time with the managers. Compliance, as I talked about earlier in the webinar, is a very important piece. And really, it's my belief that it should be all of these above things as you're talking about performance management. Performance management is a never-ending cycle. There's always planning for it. It's always reviewing. And ultimately, it's a process of ongoing assessment where you're constantly thinking about how can I work with my employees to give them great feedback so that they can make a difference in the new year. This is a great cartoon I love. Again, I use this a lot during my corporate training. you don't want managers doing this to employees. You don't want them saying your evaluation is based on the next 10 minutes. It's really important that managers know they need to be looking back at the entire body of work. And I'm going to give you some tips as we go on in the webinar about how you can do that. So as we talk about creating a system that works, think about using the job description as a starting point and thinking about aligning that job description with the strategic goals of the organization. Make sure that your system sets goals for the new year and at the same time allows employees a place for feedback. I like to get employee feedback in advance because I think that that can really help the manager remember some of these things that happened earlier in the year. So I like to design programs where the employees actually have a different form that they complete that gives their manager some ideas and insights into some of the things they've accomplished this year and some of the struggles they might have had. So what I'd like to know in our next vote, now that we know these are working, I'd like to know from the audience, how often are you doing performance reviews in your company? Do you do them annually on the employee's anniversary? Do you do them annually once a year for the whole company? Are you doing them semi-annually? Do you just do them once a year? Oh, I put that twice, sorry. Or is the real question, what review? That you really don't do reviews much at all. So if everybody would just take a minute, skip that fourth one, sorry about that, and go ahead and vote. Oh, somebody voted there. That's fine. Annually is annually. And we'll figure that out. But I see the votes are starting to come in, and that's terrific. So let's go ahead and let that accumulate for a moment or two. And then we've got, the more people who vote, this is really interesting information, even inside your own organizations, because people ask me all the time, what's the right way to do this? And the truth is there is no right way. It's really more about what works for your organization. So I'm going to go on to the next slide, and everybody can keep voting. I'm going to leave it open for another slide or two. Whoops. Sorry. And then we'll come back to the polling when I see we've got a lot of polls, and I'll share with you. So you want to create a system in your organization that really does drive value and aligns with the goals in your organization. So you want to have annual objectives and goals that are aligned with those objectives. Back in the 1980s, we always talked about the balanced scorecard. And that was a way to get everybody talking about the same thing. You want to make sure also that your performance review document is gathering the data you need to determine training or resources that are needed by your employee population, because often looking across all the performance reviews, you're able to determine what things you might want to bring in-house as training opportunities. And then make sure you set a timeline for the performance management. The biggest gripe we hear from employees is that my performance review was 3 or 4 months late. Now, one of the questions that many of you are going to say is, what am I supposed to do when my managers don't finish their performance reviews? And what I say is, make that part of your manager's next performance review and make sure to share with their leader who didn't do their job on time. So let's look, actually, before we look at this too much, let's go ahead and look at the voting. Very interesting that really almost 60% of the group does the polling annually, or the performance reviews annually. And that's not unusual. I'm surprised that we don't have anybody who does it annually on the employee's anniversary. I happen to really like doing it once a year for their whole company, because I believe then you just have it over and done with. You get all the information at the same time. But we also have 14% of the people on this call who are saying, what review? So those are the people that hopefully want information on how to create performance reviews. And I do invite you guys, I've got a number of attachments and links over here. If you want to, oh, it looks like I don't have the link to my actual website. The Get to Know Lori has my website. Feel free to email me if you have specific questions for your organization as we go forward. So let's go on to this slide, which I love. This is going to be sent to each and every one of you following the webinar, because it's one of my favorite techniques for performance management. And this is the idea that as you look at goal setting, think way beyond the traditional goal environment. There are lots of things you can do for employees that they will find really interesting, really engaging, and help you grow your company without a whole lot of expense. So, for instance, if you've got a production person that seems to always be a roadblock for getting things done, send them out with salespeople. Send them out to really understand what the issue is as you go forward. If you've got people, let's say you've got a business. I mentioned earlier in the webinar about a business's goal being an industry leader and being really known as an expert. Do you have people going out to Chamber of Commerce meetings, community meetings, nonprofit meetings, and really talking up your organization? Those are great ways to get people presentation skills, to have people be able to interact better with other departments. There are all sorts of external ways that we can get people involved that don't cost us a lot of money. So I think these can be great initiatives as you move forward. Now, as we talk about the performance management process, it's important that you do train your team on how to do this correctly. So often we just send out forms and tell managers, many of whom have never done this, most of whom have never done this well, to just sit down, fill this form out, and talk to your employees. And they really don't know how to make it a really terrific, productive conversation. So the first step is to prepare. It's tell your team that you have an expectation that they are going to spend some time thinking about this. This is one of my favorite tips. A lot of people don't do this, but I think it's really important that you give the employee their review the morning of the meeting. Why do I say that? Because people so often walk into their own performance review. They have no idea what's coming at them. They are not prepared to talk about what's happening. And all of a sudden, the manager wonders why they're not engaged. So I like to give the review to people 2 to 3 hours in advance and ask them to please spend some time going through it and thinking about both the positive and the constructive criticism therein. Now, the reason I tell you don't give it to them the night before is you do not want the opinion of their spouse, their boyfriend, their mother, their sister, or anyone else. You just want to give it to them in enough time that they can read through it and come to the performance review meeting with an intelligent thought process about especially the constructive criticism and why they might have struggled with some of these things. That way you can start the meeting off by saying, did anything I say surprise you? I'm 53 years old, you all can't see me, so I've sat through a lot of performance review meetings, and there is nothing more painful than sitting there while your manager reads you everything they wrote on the assessment. What you really want is your manager to just start a conversation about what you think you read and where you think you should focus. You want to focus on those high-level accomplishments and the opportunities for improvement. But I don't believe that you need to go through every single piece of the performance review. If you have things that the employee has been doing well for years, they're continuing to do well, mark them and move on. And finally, make sure that you are describing actual situations and expected behaviors that you expect to see. So don't just say to an employee, you don't communicate well with the team. Rather say to the employee, when we have our weekly team meetings, you tend to be disengaged and you're looking at your phone the whole time. The people at the meeting would like you to make more eye contact. Be very specific about what people are expected to do. And allow the employee time to participate. You want it to be a two-way conversation. So make sure you're training your management team to do these things so that they will relax and be able to have a great conversation with their employee. Remember that a performance management program is going to include a large number of steps. It starts with a detailed understanding of the position. It gives consideration and motivation to each employee. So it's important that your management team doesn't just brush everyone with a broad stroke. Some employees want to have really aggressive goals for the new year. I had an employee who worked for me for 5 years and never had a single goal. Her motivation was only to come to work and do a great job every day. But she didn't want to advance in the company. She didn't want a lot of additional pressure because she had a fairly aggressive structure at home that took a lot of her energy. And that's okay. Let's not assume everyone wants to move up your corporate ladder. So really meet your employees where they are. Make sure, again, that your performance management program is aligned with your goals, and you're giving feedback and you're creating the documentation that will help support your organization with that feedback. I think a great thing to incorporate into your performance management program are total compensation statements. That's actually a small plug for a Bright Talk webinar that I'm doing in July. And we will talk about how to build and create and share with your employees total compensation statements. And that's the idea where you sit down with them and you show exactly what their pay is from the organization, going far beyond just the dollars and cents. And finally, you're using your performance management program to identify your top talent. People often come to me in human resources and say, we need to treat all our employees the same. Absolutely not. You want to identify those top people in your organization. And by top talent, I don't mean top performers. I mean those people that are truly going to help move your organization forward. And finally, make sure that your performance management program identifies those people to be separated when the time is right to separate them. Sometimes we have to make that hard decision in employment. So those are the ideas that I wanted to throw out to you today. Here is my contact information. I would love to answer specific questions. All you have to do is type them in the question box. I'd love to stay connected with each of you on Twitter, and I will go ahead and send the tools out to everybody who registered for this webinar. So many of you who are going to watch it as a recorded webinar will have already received the tools. The rest of you will get a link to them in about an hour. and I would love to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you don't have any questions, we will wrap up. Okay, I'll give you a couple of minutes, but otherwise, thank you for attending, and do look for some of those other webinars that I have offered through Bright Talk. I'd love to hear feedback from any of you. This is a great way for me to know how you enjoyed things and whether or not they've worked for you. So thank you very much.